lunch dates together. Let me interrupt you a minute.
Sure. I do that
Picking
because
up-
I look here.
I know you do. Picking up where we left off with the Spanish, there is a newspaper in Tampa, which is the only trilingual newspaper in apparently the world, Spanish, Italian, and English, La Gazzetta. And they are not known for being nice to people of our ilk, but they put a nice thing about your father in here, saying that Tampa has lost one of its favorite adopted sons. Now, to be Irish and be mentioned in this column is something, but to be mentioned favorably? So I saved that, and you all can have a copy of that to put with your packets if you want.
There's actually two articles in that same, there's another one later on that's a great commentary as well that I've got a copy of, but I'll pass on.
And let me just add to what Ron was saying about mentoring. There were two things that Phil always did with at least my cases. When you knew you were going to trial and it was past the point where anybody's going to try and work a plea agreement, he would call. And he'd call me and he'd say, Jude, is there anything I can do to help you? You okay? Fine, you said, Phil, we're doing that. And then afterwards, he would always either call or personally come downstairs to our office and say, good job, and often write a note in my personnel file to the same effect. But he never forgot to offer that encouragement and that support beforehand, and then to say something afterwards. So, anyway.
Let me say something again too. Some of you met Barry Cohen at the funeral services. Barry was our nemesis. He was a defense attorney who was like an enemy to the FBI. But he made a point to come to Phil's service because he knew that if the trial was going to go on and he had a defendant, he was going to get a fair shake when Phil was in charge. And so that's another testament. But he's still our nemesis.
Great one-liner Phil had in your Florida Power case, when they were going to lock the president.
Wait, save that, because when we talk about the Florida Power case, I was going to call on you.
Well,
That would fit in better than.
I don't know, but so the defense attorney calls in and says, "Understand you want my man."
He wants to tell you more than the line.
What?
I wanted to save
He's
that
gonna
for
cue
the
you.
end of the story that we're going into right now.
Oh, okay.
Again, okay.
I could never get this little place straight here.
You're not still going, are you? No. Okay, in 1978, I'm trying to do this chronologically again, Phil called me and the supervisor we had at the time, I think it was Tony Daniels, down to his office along with Ron Jordan. And first time I met Chris Hoyer, who was a prosecutor at the time, assistant United States attorney. And Chris had with him a state's attorney, assistant state's attorney from Pinellas, a fellow named Marvin Rudnick. And they were talking about this case that had been in the paper in what was then the St. Pete Times on almost a daily basis. It was the era where we had the first Arab oil embargo, and there were lines all around gas stations, and it was creating great turmoil in this country. And everybody was looking for a reason this was happening, because a lot of people, and I think rightfully so, were suspecting that people were using this opportunity to gouge the public, not only with gasoline, but heating fuels and other things. And this Marvin Rudnick had, on his own, come across some information that he put together, playing around in his spare time, indicating that the fuel that Florida Power Corporation over in St. Petersburg, headquartered over there, that they were buying was being the cost was being exaggerated. In order to try to keep a lid on prices, the government, U.S. government, had passed a law saying essentially that if you resold oil during this period of time, you couldn't make more than a 10% profit on the sale. So what a group of oil men in Houston had done was they created 6 different companies that were just paper companies, and then they make it appear that they sold and resold and resold, and when they were done, they jacked up the price by 60%. And of course, that was a big profit to them because these were their companies. But in order to make this work, they had to have somebody at the Florida Power Corporation approving the purchases because Florida Power could go out on the open market and buy this at a cheaper price. So we had to have somebody on the inside of Florida Power that was going to be create a ready market for our jacked up fuel prices. And that person that they got to was the president of Florida Power Corporation, a guy named Angel Perez. And Marvin put this all together. He brought it in to the United States Attorney's Office. Marvin was a United States Attorney himself at the time, and said, I think there's going to be federal charges in here, and I put this together. And Phil, again, immediately recognized the importance of this, and again, that there were stories insinuating all this stuff that almost on a daily basis at the time in the St. Pete Times. So he saw that it was going to have a high profile, and I was honored that he picked me and Ron to be the co-case agents on that case. And make a very long story short, we ended up charging 5 oil men from Houston, the president and the vice president of Florida Power Corporation with violations of federal law. And case went on for a while. It was tried in actually 3 different sections. We went up to Jacksonville for a period of time, weeks on end, and tried that case. And almost every day I had to check in with Phil because he was watching this, and there was pressure coming from the newspaper that, you know, what's happening. They had reporters up there around the clock reporting on this thing live, daily bulletins and everything. And it really was a big deal. Later on, it made it onto 60 Minutes and Wall Street Journal and Forbes magazine and everything as a big case that we had finally put together because, in essence, we had proved what the public was suspecting at the time, that there were people out there taking advantage of the situation. Now, as I say, Ron was a co-case agent. Judy was one of the prosecutors along with Chris on that case. So I asked Ron to go first and talk about your impressions of the case and your connection with Phil or whatever.
Yeah, most cases the FBI agents handle, or one agent handles the case and you got one defendant. And so you work it by yourself, and it's, you know, it may take a month or 2 or 3 to get it worked up. This kind of case, you put a team together because you've got multi-defendants, multi-millions of dollars involved. And what you've got to have is somebody that's going to give you backup when you need to go somewhere else. Most cases, if you have what we call a lead in another state or another place, then you send it to that office, and that office has an agent there working. But this got so complicated that unless you could travel around to these different places yourself and do the work, it just wasn't feasible. And most SACs were very reluctant at that time to approve travel, whatever. But Phil never, ever objected. And you had to go get the approval from the SAC to do this. And so by us being able to go anywhere and do this case, it was a tremendous help. You know, only by the fact that, you know, Phil was backing us the whole way to do this. It was unusual for agents at that time to travel around the country. I mean, just, it was an unusual thing. I don't know if you've heard the term daisy chaining in a crooked deal. Well, this is what daisy chaining is. These people on paper develop these companies. The first real company, like say Gulf Oil or Texaco, would sell the oil to company A that they've made up. Just on paper. The next company that they own would then buy it for 20 cents a gallon more. And we're talking millions of gallons here. We're not talking, you know, a truckload, we're talking barges. And what would happen, as soon as Florida Power actually bought the oil, the barge from Texas would start on its way over the Gulf of Mexico and would come to Florida. And so, let's say the price was initially $1 a gallon. By the time it got here, it was like $2 a gallon. But the only thing that happened different is that on paper they would invoice each other, and that's the only work they did, was send an invoice to the next company. And they took all this extra money for themselves then, and of course they bribed the people at Florida Power to do this. And so that's how a daisy chain works. You don't really do any work. You just send out an invoice, and that's it. And you're making millions of dollars off the public, because it's the public that is then gonna pay the rate hike, and of course, the company will say, oh, we had to pay $2 a gallon for this oil, and therefore we need a hike in your rates for the public to pay for this. Well, that will only cost them $1 a gallon, not $2. And all these crooks were then sharing that difference in the $2. And that's what daisy chaining is, and that's what they did. And of course, without the backing of Phil to let us travel and do whatever we needed to do, it would have been very difficult to have done that case.
And I think when you look, I'll give out these packets later on, there are articles about this, but there's a group photograph of everybody that was involved in that case. I think I included in there, there were probably 25 agents from different agencies and everything to show you the size of that case. And again, it was all being run out of this little office in Tampa, and Washington was watching this too, because again, it was very newsworthy and very relevant at the time. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I came into the case just a little bit late. Al told you about Marvin Rudnick, who was the assistant state attorney from Pinellas County that brought the case. Well, that was 1978, and I had just started in the office in 77. I was like bottom rung of the ladder in the U.S. Attorney's Office. So Chris had asked me to draft jury instructions. By now, I was 6 years old, so I was able to do that. But if you looked up the words loose cannon in the dictionary, you would find a picture of Marvin Rudnick, because he was a loose cannon. And when Chris and Marvin got to trial up in Jacksonville, I think the judge on the bench nearly threw Marvin out of the courtroom. But Chris called down for help, and Mr. James, Bill James, came into me and said, can you go up to Jacksonville and help him out? Right after that, I got a call from Phil saying, I understand you're going up to Jacksonville. Do you need anything? And I thought, yeah, I need a lot of stuff, Phil, but I'm not sure you can get it for me right now. But he was great support in that case, which was a lot more complex in proving than it is in reciting, and required a lot of skill in bringing all those pieces together and managing it all, and all with the press looking over your shoulder all the time and trying to get information. So you know more about it than I do, actually. I showed up for trial.
Well, the details are all in those articles that are in the packet that I'm going to give out later on. Now, Jim, you can tell your story.
It's your cue.
When it all came down, Phil was gonna lock up the president of Florida Power, no, rather significant event. So his lawyer calls and says, I'll be happy to bring him in. And Phil said, don't worry about it, we'll come get him. He says, he's not Dillinger, you know. And Phil said, you're right. Dillinger never stole as much money as your client.
Okay, again, chronologically moving along here, while that case was going on, because it took several years to resolve, Tony Daniels, who I mentioned earlier, he was supervisor of the organized crime squad on which Ron and I were assigned at the time. He started another project while we were all caught up with Florida Power, and it was called the Coldwater case, and it got its name, Coldwater, from the principal subject in there, a fellow named Jimmy Aquafrida. Aquafrida is cold water. And the idea, and Tony was very ambitious, and again, and he had some good insight as to how to really attack the mafia. And he got together with Phil, and Phil approved the whole idea, which was very innovative, which was we found this club up at Holiday on Highway 19 that was abandoned. It had a couple of tennis courts and a house that had a structure that had a bar in it, and it was like a clubhouse and everything, and they looked at it and said, we can turn this into a bottle club, an after-hours bottle club, and we can get the word out that it's being run by the mob. The FBI headquarters at Quantico, they set down crap tables and things that they had seized during raids so we could stock it down there. It looked pretty good. It looked like a little Las Vegas casino when they put it all together. And we worked it it probably went on for the better part of 5 years. In fact, Phil retired and it was still going on. At one point, we had a lot of evidence against local police and other officials that everybody knew that was going on over there, what was happening. They didn't know that it was an FBI operation, but they thought there was a mob operation in this Holiday, which is not the biggest town in the world, and so word spreads fast. And they would come in, the police would come in and basically shake down our undercover agents and say, look, we know what's going on here, we're gonna raid it, you know, but we can give you protection. And so we got all that recorded, we got the whole place wired, and we were monitoring it 24 hours a day. And we gathered all this information, and we felt that we got pretty much all we could get in the area. The police department over there was only so big and everything, we pretty much had their captain and everybody else caught up in it. So Tony, with Phil's agreement, reached out to another undercover operation that was going on in New York at the time, involving an agent named Joe Pistone, who was using an undercover name of Donnie Brasco, and you may have heard he wrote a book later on, and then a movie was made out of a pretty good movie. If you've seen the movie, a lot of the scenes that occur in the movie where they come in and raid the